every cycle, people come in and they tell you why they need to compromise on security, why they need to compromise on self-custody. It's usually got onboarding the masses and their rationality. Yeah. And it always blows up. And Ledger says, you know what? We're going to keep high standards of security and self-custody. We're not going to go below them. And therefore, we'll be here tomorrow.
You're kind of looking at your portfolio of work, music, luxury brands, kind of going from one thing to the next. And you heard about Bitcoin. What was it about Ledger's story that drew you in?
Music and kind of early internet, some luxury brands, not crypto with Ledger. Is there any common thread that kind of ties your experience together in these ecosystems?
Storytelling plus time equals value.
Welcome back to the Rollup. We are your hosts. I'm Andy.
I'm Robbie, and this is your home to learn from the biggest guests, the brightest minds at the tip of innovation.
Our goal is to help spread the collective knowledge of everyone in our community.
We are breaking crypto out of its echo chamber and taking it to the real world.
Ian, man,
welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. We've had quite a few conversations with meme coin trenchers and launchpads today. None of them
not the usual show for us.
Not the usual show for us. And neither of them had the hair that you have. So you're a nice, refreshing guest today.
Hey man, thank you. I'm this old. I still have this hair, so I figure I got a lot of my friends don't. You know what I mean? I gotta keep it going.
Man, I got a feeling you found Bitcoin in like 2012. Am I right? Am I wrong?
Not quite. You know, I knew about Bitcoin 2009, 2010, but was like, so I looked at it through the lens of, I had done digital music, and I looked at it through the lens of watching, you know, 𝗏𝗏 and anyone who had been in the peer-to-peer business get sued out of existence. And I said, okay, well, this is super interesting technology, but you know, they can't kill the technology, but they can kill businesses that are around the technology, which is what they did with 𝗏𝗏 and file sharing, right? You can't kill the ability to move one file from one computer to the other, but you can get rid of 𝗏𝗏, LimeWire, BearShare, et cetera. And that's what happened. So I looked at Bitcoin and I said, this threatens state sovereignty. So they will obviously come after this. But by around 2015, I was like, wait a minute, this is too big. You know, this is now the game theory's on, where if, let's say that one country bans it, another country's going to welcome it. It had gotten to that size. So that was when I started really paying attention. And then I joined Ledger in 2021. Really, it was during COVID where, you know, Tony Fadell and I, Tony was the podfather, created the iPod and co-invented the iPhone. And he and I spent a lot of time, our family spent a lot of time together during COVID. And we were looking at crypto at that time going, this is it. You know, this is, you know, the technology is here. A lot of these ideas that were sort of a promise, like smart contract, for example, that was like an idea 4 years ago is real today. And you've got 2 trillion of stimulus in the US, 1 trillion of stimulus in Europe. This is what this technology was built for. And that was when it was really go time. And I came to my friend Pascal, who was the CEO and still is at Ledger, and said, all right, what are we doing? And that's how I ended up joining the company in January of 21.
There was a clip that I saw just today, and it speaks to something that you're talking about, where it was Tucker Carlson and another, it was a co-founder, and they said they thought Bitcoin was like created by the federal government, but it kind of got out of hand. And so we can, maybe there's something, and they also said that like Rockefellers, Rothschilds, they would never let their power go to this new world, this new era. But I'm curious, because I've heard this connection between digital music and Bitcoin. I think Andy and I were actually sitting in an airport. We were on our way to ETH Denver one year, and this guy started talking to us about it. And I was curious about the connection, because this isn't the first time that I've heard it. So when you were kind of doing this digital music thing, where did Bitcoin come in? How did you kind of stumble upon it back 2009, 2010?
It was a guy in my office at the time. We were running a company called Topspin back then. So my background for your listeners, I studied computer science in the early 90s. I dropped out of grad school to go on tour with the Beastie Boys in 1995. We did Winamp in the late 90s, which when that team at Winamp is who also created Shoutcast and 𝗏𝗏. But then I did Yahoo Music for a bunch of years, making a long story short. And then we had this company called Topspin. And this guy, Parker Todd Brooks, worked for us at Topspin. And he was like, Bitcoin, you got to check this out. You got to check this out. And, I'm just a nerd. So I'm like, all right, well, what is it? And I do the deep dive and try to get my head around it. So to me, it's more of I think it's more about the kind of people. I mean, digital music was the tip of the spear with the internet, I think, for a very specific reason. If you think about it, you go back to the 90s, like audio files are pretty small, like video files were just too big to deal with in those days. Digital music is a really simple database problem, artist, album, track, genre, every young coder loves music. You can listen to music while you code, so I think that there's there's an old joke that like every college student has this idea for a company that has to do with either music or bars. You know what I mean? So there is some, I think it's just the tip of the spear because it's a kind of a nice entry point. And that's why music was really disrupted by Napster in 1999, 2000, where a lot of the, internet disrupted a lot of other industries more around 2010. And that's why I think that digital art is a tip of the spear. And the reason is because it's just really simple. You think about value and exchanging value between two individuals. If we have to come up with a currency, getting enough people to buy into the value of that currency is that's a scale problem in a way. Whereas I make this thing, do you like it? Oh, I like it. Oh, cool. Want to trade it? Oh yeah, let's trade it. You literally need two people, right? And that's why if you look in the world of digital art, sometimes you'll see an auction that goes for, tons of money, but there were really only two bidders. Because if you think about it, that's the way, even in the contemporary art world, it can be the case. There are famous examples of particular pieces going for huge amounts of money, but there were really only two bidders, right? And that to me is why digital art is the tip of the spear, because a market can literally be one or two people. And whereas, to get to a true ecosystem, it takes much more than that. So I think that, music was the tip of the spear for the internet for those reasons. And I think that, digital art holds a similar place in the world of digital value for that other very specific reason. No matter what you think about digital art, it's a physical fact or fact of physics.
Just one last thing on this, and then we'll get into some of the ledgers, some of the stable coins, some of the self-custody concepts. You've worked in music, in kind of early internet, some luxury brands, now crypto with Ledger. Is there any common thread that kind of ties your experience together in these ecosystems, whether it be the types of people, the work, the values, just any kind of experience that you can tie a thread through that applies to each of these industries, maybe in their early days?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a few things. Probably the number one thing that I would keep in mind is that storytelling plus time equals value. Right. And if you look at it, that doesn't matter if it's the Beatles, if it's Christian Dior, or if it's Bitcoin. Storytelling plus time equals value. And I think we really discount that. We look at, we try to look at, fundamentals, of course they have to be there, but the fundamentals are what creates the story. I mean, in the case of Bitcoin, we could easily bemoan the ETF and say, hey, that's not the spirit of Bitcoin. If not self-custody, why crypto? There are a bunch of things that we could say, but the reality is, if it's not for what Bitcoin actually is and the story of Bitcoin and the ability to do self-custody, it doesn't have that value. There's no value in the ETF if Bitcoin isn't Bitcoin.
Right.
And so I think that, to me, this is the thing that holds it all together. And I think the other thing that I'm really comfortable with that a lot of people aren't is just that storytelling has value. And that's what I have loved so much about Bitcoin and digital assets broadly, is it's really forced me to look at this thing that I never really thought about before. What is value? How is it created? And I realized that I was already thinking about that, because why does a particular artist have an appeal to so many people and another one doesn't? And why are there these inefficiencies? What I always wanted in music was just to be more efficient. I feel like we're all bombarded with music we don't really like all the time. And there's a bunch of music we would like that we're not getting. Super inefficient. I always wanted to fix that inefficiency. So then you become a student of how technology changes culture. but the reality is that value is a part of culture.
Yeah.
And so for me, I watched the digitization of all information, and that's really what the internet was, a revolution of information. And now, we're living through this once in humanity digitization of all value. And that's really what blockchain is, the digitization of all value. And so there's some sort of a thread in that. And then I really like, I was with LVMH for 5 years, and then I consulted with LVMH for 4 years after I left my full-time position there. And I just love that business. I love that, most people don't get it. Like, so many people would say, oh, why would anyone spend $50,000 on a watch? And I think that but the reality is that they do. If you live in denial of that fact, then you don't understand the way humans work, and there's a lot of value in like understanding that. And, to be honest, people who understand why someone would spend $50,000 on a watch are very well placed to understand why someone would spend $250,000 on a CryptoPunk. They're very similar. Why does understanding why Basquiat has value is very related to why does a CryptoPunk have value? Because storytelling plus time equals value. Every year, more people know the story of Basquiat, and there is no more supply.
Yeah.
Storytelling plus time is value.
It's that simple.
This is similar to the Lindy effect, where the longer that something's around, the more likely it's going to be around in the future, because it starts to build that insulation around it. That's right.
But what's really interesting about that, Ravi, is that really applies to brands. Like if you start to reposition things and think about brands, and if you realize that Bitcoin is a brand, the Beatles is a brand, Christian Dior is a brand. Christian Dior died a long time ago, and Christian Dior as a brand is more valuable today than ever. Louis Vuitton died a very, very long time ago, but Pharrell carries that torch and builds the storytelling and adds to that time. And if you and I started a brand today, then it's going to take us 15 years. There's no overnight success in brands.
Right.
There's just, it can't happen. It can only grow organically. I'm watching my friend 𝗵𝗵𝗏 build this running clothes brand called Satisfy. And I'm watching him build it brick by brick. And it's the best lesson in brand building I've ever seen in my life. And I feel it, I'm friendly with the really amazing person who's the CEO of Golden Goose, the shoe brand. And what's interesting about that brand is, the first 15 or so years were organic growth, slowish growth. Now the hockey stick growth was in the next 15 years, and that makes perfect sense. It's the Lindy effect, as you said. It's like you have to have. It's almost like in brand building, in culture, we can like point to it, because we can say, okay, Golden Goose had to be around long enough that Virgil Abloh could say, yo, that was my shit when I was in high school. You know what I mean? Like, you have to be around that long. And if you're not around that long, then you haven't built, to your point, any of that insulation, right? Yeah. And that's why last year I was going like, this year is Bitcoin's year. You know why? People be like, why? I say, because 15 years. That's it. It's just that simple.
Stand the test of time. And without time, it hasn't shown that it hasn't earned that.
Hasn't earned it. And think about 15 years of everyone trying to kill it from every angle, the technical angle, the security angle, the shit talking angle. Like, people try for 15 years to kill it, and Bitcoin's just still sitting there going, guess what?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good segue to Ledger.
Yeah,
because Ledger
that is a good segue.
Because it's a security, it's a brand that's built on trust and security, and it takes time to earn that trust. And so when you were looking at this, and you were kind of looking at your portfolio of work, music, luxury brands, kind of going from one thing to the next, and you heard about Bitcoin, what was it about Ledger's story that drew you in?
So I didn't get it when I first met Pascal in 2015. I was like, okay. I mean, by the way, Ledger started in 2014, right? So it was sort of like, okay, I guess, like, why aren't we just going to do this on our phones? You know what I mean? Like, our phones seem real powerful. So for me, one hurdle I had to get over was that question. Just technically speaking, why can't our phones and our computers do this? And that one, I'm technical enough that didn't take me very long. Once I spent some time with the founders of Ledger, there's a couple things here. One, it's based on the chip and pin technology, right? And The other is just the simple fact that phones and computers are built for performance, not for security. And they've got layers of technology in there. It's really like if I gave you the task, I'm like, hey, I've got 1 billion in gold bars. Let's build a building to protect this. And you're like, okay, let me get into that. And you start planning it out. And then I come to you and I go, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to mention, I'm going to put a shopping mall and a kindergarten and a nightclub in the building too. And you'd be like, please don't. Like, can we just focus on the gold bars? But that's literally what, and if you're keeping value on your phone or even worse in your browser, like that's what you're up against, right? That's not what it was designed for. It was designed, it's a very powerful tool, but it was designed for something else, where Ledger was designed for this very specific thing. I think the other thing for me was just realizing that as this value grows, as it becomes less niche and becomes more something that everyone's doing, then the attack surface gets broader, not, not more, like, it doesn't become more hardened, it becomes less. And you have a device that your kids are playing Candy Crush on, and you're also going to try to protect your wealth on that. Like, that just seems absurd. But the real thing for me that made me kind of get Ledger was 2017 boom and bust, the ICO craze. Because during the ICO craze, I was just like, I don't know. Like, I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is .com madness. I've seen this before. I remember 1999 really well. I'm that old. And this is just total madness. This does not hold. And I was like, also, who knows? Like, I thought it was Bitcoin and Ethereum, but I don't know. Like, you got Kodak coin and your mama coin and everything else.
Kanye coin, man.
Yeah, coin now.
I don't know, And then it all came crashing down. And I was like, oh my God, Ledger. Because what I remember from the late 90s was the same. It was a bloodbath. Everybody was going to kill everybody. Was it Yahoo, Excite, Lycos, Alta Vista, Google? You thought Netscape couldn't be killed, but Microsoft comes in with Internet Explorer. There's a book called World War 3.0, AOL, which is like, what? They buy Netscape, what? Like, it was just, and then what I remember from that 99 era is that Cisco was just sitting there on the side going, we're good. Why? Because they have one question. Will there be more internet tomorrow or less internet tomorrow? We think more. Okay, we're going to be fine. They don't really care if it's Google or Alta Vista or somebody else. Cisco is just Cisco. So I called Pascal, my friend Pascal. I was like, Pascal, I think your company's going to be huge. He was like, okay, well, you finally get it after we've known each other for 3 years. Like, why do you finally get it? I said, because you're Cisco. Like, I just watched 1,000 coins get created and 999 coins fail, and Ledger doesn't care. Ledger's like the honey badger, doesn't care. Ledger's like, will there be more internet value tomorrow or less? I think more. Okay, guess what? You're going to, if digital value, you must have self-custody, or else what are we doing? We're building another Visa, another PayPal? No. If not self-custody, why crypto? Well, if self-custody, then security. It's that simple. And so Ledger's the only company that's been around for 11 years saying exactly the same thing. We are maximalists about self-custody and security. We have standards of self-custody and security that we don't go below. Every cycle, people come in and they tell you why they need to compromise on security, why they need to compromise on self-custody. It's usually got onboarding the masses and their rationality. And it always blows up. And Ledger says, you know what? We're going to keep high standards of security and self-custody, and we're not going to go below them. And therefore, we'll be here tomorrow. Because if not self-custody, why crypto? And if self-custody, then security. Period. And also, coming out of luxury, I'm very happy to be that premium choice. 7.5 billion smartphones with some kind of a value management app on them, from PayPal and Venmo to Coinbase, Robinhood, Revolut, right? I'm very happy to be the one where, if you're serious about finance, if you're serious about security, privacy, self-custody, counterparty risk in the form of like not getting FTX'd, Ledger is your choice. 7.5 billion with 1 billion people with a password problem. How many of them have like good password hygiene? Okay, not very many, but enough that 1Password is a great business, right? Same thing here. You're going to have 7.5 billion with value apps on their phone. How many of them are going to have good security, real privacy, no counterparty risk? Okay, it probably won't be 50%. I'm the first one to admit that, but it's still the right way to do it and a great business for Ledger. And that's like who we are and why we're here.
Introducing Extended exclusively on Starknet, a next-gen perps trading platform live today. With 50 plus trading pairs from crypto to TradFi, you get the best experience on chain today. Deposit in the community vault for attractive returns, EMV compatible, and engage in unified margin, spot trading, lending, and perps trading. Exclusively live at extended.app on Starknet today.
Stable coins from these institutional providers. I mean, the Treasury Secretary Bessent says this is $1 trillion industry. It's going to help the US issue T-bills and treasuries. That is all happening through like custody, like custodians. They're using BitGo and Coinbase custody. And then on the other side, it's the convenience that you mentioned. Like it's these guys that maybe they don't have good password hygiene and they're using it. And it's kind of, they want exposure to dollars. Maybe it's in the third world and they don't have that luxury. They're not taking it seriously. It's just, it's incrementally better than their own native currency. And so where does Ledger carve out the audience that you're talking about, its customer segment between these institutions and then these, these other countries' citizens that are using it to get exposure to dollars and not taking self-custody as seriously? Why should they?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, just to kind of acknowledge what you're saying, like we are at this crazy inflection point where you've got this like real merge of TradFi and crypto, right? Which is it's a great moment for all of us, I think. And I think this is where my internet history experience comes in handy, because I think there's both hope and caution if you look back at the internet history. Like first of all, we still have TCP/IP, and we do have a free and open internet in many places. Now at the same time, there are a lot of things where it's converged around big players, right? The GAFA, and how many we used to have 1 billion email providers. That's an exaggeration, but you know what I mean? Like people used to use their like local ISP as their email provider, and now everybody's on Gmail, right? And so you do get these centralization points as well. So I think we could, we can look at that and expect some of the same things. But the reality is that there were many people who thought that the internet wasn't going to look like the internet as we have it today, with a lot of interoperability. They thought it was going to look like America Online or CompuServe. And I think that that's very much sort of like the CeFi way of looking at things. But what we ended up with is an open internet, with open protocols that are interoperable and they talk to each other. So again, I think that we will always like have these sort of scary points of centralization. And that's somewhat inevitable. I mean, if you look at like in the stablecoin space, what Circle announced last week by announcing their L1, you're like, wow, are we just kind of moving toward like a more balkanized world again? But also I think it's a bit naive to think that we're going to onboard, grandma to the, sorry for your loss world, right? There's going to have to be like flavors of this, which have guardrails, for the average population. And I think that there are, people building tools for that. Circle's one of them. Canton Network's another one. There are really interesting things happening in that space. Also, though, all of those, whether it is USDC or like a Canton Network or a private blockchain, privacy-centric blockchain, you still do have self-custody at the end of the day. Someone has custody. Even in the case of a custodian, the security of that custodian matters. And at Ledger, we have two sides to the business, a retail side of the business and an enterprise side of the business. And as a user, the security of the custody matters, whether that's in your hand or in the hands of the custodian. The amount of times that like Pascal tried to tell Sam Bankman-Fried that he should be using Ledger Enterprise, you know what I mean? Like, and Sam's like, oh, not my department. I got people on my team who worry about that. Well, we can talk about that now because FTX imploded, but we have that same conversation with exchanges that your users use every day. Your users should be asking, what is the security of the custody of those tokens on an enterprise side? Are they, and the Binance is on record saying they use Ledger Nanos, as their custody solution. Okay, well, what's the governance model around that? That's why we have Ledger Enterprises for governance. So my point is that if it's not self-custody, then it's not crypto to begin with. What we have, stable coins, is dollars running on crypto rails. There's going to be, and that also is going to lower the cost of of building fintech. You know, we don't need to use credit rails for digital cash anymore, which means that merchants don't need to pay 3% at the, you know, in the US for those transaction fees. And so you do end up with just a different infrastructure layer and a different marketplace with different like forms of competition between the players. You know, they're going to need to compete on different things. So I think at the end of the day, though, this is going to be very invisible for the customer. You know, at the beginning, remember, you know, the initial pitch for Spotify was it was a P2P network.
Yeah.
Is Spotify a P2P network today?
No.
I mean, and the answer really for me and you is who cares? Maybe.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think it is either, but for the user, who cares? It works.
Right.
Right. Same thing when I'm using a solution like Satispay to pay in Italy. Is that crypto underneath? Well, I don't know.
Who cares?
Probably not, but who cares? You know, like what the merchant cares about is that they can get the money really cheaply and they can get it immediately and they don't need to pay 3% and they don't need to wait 30 days for settlement. Like that's what the merchant cares about. And what the consumer cares about is, do I have a good user experience? Am I getting a good product at a good price when I want it? Right.
Yep.
The rest of it is for us nerds.
Yeah.
You know, and so I think, you know, we do need to care about these things. And I think there are definitely some pitfalls that, you know, collectively we want to avoid. But to be honest, the toothpaste out of the tube, you know, and you can't put it back in. Like we've got stablecoin regulation in the US. You have competition around offering the best user experience around digital dollars. And that opens a whole new world globally. And this move from God to state to network that 𝗵𝗏𝗏 talks about, this is a big, big, big moment. And so, yeah, I think there's pitfalls, but I think overall, you know, the ball rolls downhill from here. And it will, I think it will surprise us. I mean, for those of us who entered the internet because it was this, you know, open, you know, free software, free as in free speech, not free beer. Like that's where I come from, like, you know, Free Software Foundation roots. And, you know, we're obviously disappointed with an internet that's owned by Google and Facebook. So, you know, don't be naive is my lesson.
Yeah.
At the same time, the internet did change the world, no question. So, you know, in ways that we never would have predicted. So I think that you can expect the same here. It's that thing where you always overestimate it in the short term and you underestimate it in the long term. And I promise you that'll apply here.
Yeah, totally. Ian, thanks so much for coming on, man. It was an absolute pleasure. I think, you know, this was one of the more fascinating conversations because it stretched all the way from, you know, your early innings when you first heard about Bitcoin and blockchain as this record for transmitting digital music and any information digitally, all the way to the internet of value. And we're just, like you said, the ball's rolling downhill now, and this is just getting more.
Man, it's the most exciting thing I've ever been involved with. I love I love the mental calisthenics on this one. Bring me back anytime you want. I'll jump in anytime, and just have some fun with you guys.
Absolutely.
Appreciate you, Ian.
So much fun, Ian. See you next time.
See you.
All right, buddy. Be easy.
Brother.
Cheers, man.